All right. Welcome, everyone. We're excited to be sharing with you some examples of positive interactives that we have seen very successful. I am Rebecca Viser. I'm a senior strategist here at Alley, and I am joined by Ben Myers, our senior UX designer, who works with a lot of clients who do data visualizations. And so that's a large part of his work. So Ben, let's talk about some data visualizations that you like.
Hello, yes. I think I will share quickly so we can see them as we're talking. So as Rebecca said, we're going to go through three different things here. The first one that I wanted to pull up is a piece by ProPublica that came out last summer. This is a great example of using really a very simple visual to tell a story. Really nothing fancy going on here. Obviously, it's a very serious topic and an important topic. And they're just using a line chart, right? This is really simple. It's one of the more basic visualizations. We make them all the time here, but ProPublica has deployed this in a really impactful way, especially, the user comes to the website, they first see this chart, they are able to start sort of exploring the chart, seeing different categories and how different demographics are affecting unemployment. And then you can also toggle between the last 6 months and the last decade, which I think is a really amazing chart. You can really see the trend in the data set here as unemployment increases during the pandemic. On its face, it's a really simple visual. But for folks who want to learn a little bit more about what they're seeing, if you start to scroll down, you start to learn more about what data within the chart and some context around what you're seeing, why some groups are more impacted than others when it comes to unemployment. And it's just a really great, simple piece. I like how it looks visually, things like that. And these are all things that we're thinking about when we're making visualizations and presentations for clients.
So, Ben, I have a question for you. Looking at this, it looks like the y-axis. First of all, there's two of them, and they're kind of, going from zero to higher. What do you think about that kind of data proposal or presentation?
I think it was a good choice in this case because of the nature of the data set, right? We're really showing this drop off due to the pandemic that I showed here. And you also have a higher cluster of demographic groups toward the lower end of the unemployment scale, right? So they're moving that data to the top by inverting this axis. And then you can see further down some of these groups that are more heavily impacted.
I also think it's interesting because there's something about the design of it that makes me think of geography or geology, I guess is more the right. Like it almost kind
Yeah,
of
kind of
looks
like a
like
map.
a strata map.
Yeah, it's a very nice visual appearance. This one's a little crazier. I use this as an example because you do see these visualizations. They're called Sinkey Charts. You do see them on websites. They are very complicated. They're very technical. They are sort of rarely well used because they are so complicated. But I think this is an example of using one effectively, and it really shows that you have to know your data set, right? You need to investigate your data. You need to have an understanding of what information you want to convey and what you want users to get out of it. These are things we're thinking about all the time. And in this instance, they put together this really simple visual that shows you energy sources basically in the United States without the user really having to fully understand and grasp what this visual is showing them. They can get a good sense of, okay, in 1800, a lot of energy was coming from biomass. And they can then go through this presentation and see how it's changing over time. So here we have coal coming into it, we have natural gas. You can start to see the rise of petroleum, a little bit of hydraulic power, and then you start to see, petroleum's kind of taking over, nuclear comes into the picture. And so you can kind of, play with this. You don't really have to look at the specific values to get an idea of how these different sources of energy are starting to be used, right? So for petroleum, you can see it's going to transportation and industrial. The actual value doesn't really matter to me, right? Just kind of gives me an idea. I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I like this. But getting back to my original point, you really have to understand what visual can suit your data. Because there are instances where a line chart is appropriate and instances where it's not. It depends on the data set. For this particular presentation, just giving folks a sense of energy sources and what they're used for, I think this is really well done. If the point of this visual was for users to pull data out of it, actual values to understand how they were changing over time, this would not be a great use. This would not be a great visualization for that, because it's really hard to get to those actual numeric values and understand how they're changing over time.
So it sounds like this type of chart is really useful for showing changes and trends over time. Is that accurate?
I think I would say changes over time is accurate, trends not so much, right? You can kind of get a sense of it here, right? You can see that petroleum is kind of increasing over time, but you can't actually see, you can't really pull out easily, oh, in 1805, petroleum was at 0, and by 2015, it was, 3,000 or whatever this value is here.
I think what feels very impactful about it is being able to move through time. Would you ever use this for like a static point, or do you always think it kind of needs that contrast?
When you say static point, you mean just showing
Right,
one
like
moment in time?
if this was the full chart, for example, and like you couldn't go from 1800 to 1850.
Well, no, you can't show one point in a Sankey diagram. I think for this particular information set, it would kind of be pretty boring, right? To just show 1 year. And it wouldn't let people kind of see, you can see it auto plays here. It wouldn't let people see how it's changing over time. Does that answer your question? You may have talked around it.
Yes, I think so. I guess the overall question is, showing it at one point in time, you can still get some information from it, but the real power of a chart like this can come from seeing changes.
Right, exactly. Especially for this data set, right? Like I could imagine them showing just 1992 for this data set, and you can glean some information out of that, but it's not showing you that full picture that they're actually presenting by showing it over time.
I also have to say, I know this isn't part of the page we're talking about, but I love the design for the stacked line graph.
Yeah.
That it, like, to me, it really is indicative of like forest almost. It's like the green and the trees.
Oh, the
almost.
colors.
Yeah.
These are all very geographic in nature, aren't they? Yeah, and this serves to give folks some more. This is a little bit, I think, even more technical than the display up top. But for those who are really interested, I think it helps to provide a little more context as to what you're seeing up top, where we were talking about the limitations of a Sankey diagram showing discrete changes over time. The area chart covers that.
Yeah, so I guess the one thing that I find a little confusing is I'm guessing the timeline is kind of the x-axis for both.
I think so. If this were something we were doing, I think we would label the axis on both charts just so it's really clear. The area chart also doesn't have a y-axis, which I think would be helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So this last example, this is I think what we would consider a microsite or a website focused on data, right? This is floodfactor.com. And I think this is a really great example of a data-heavy website that's really doing a lot of heavy lifting when it comes to helping folks understand the data they're looking at and contextualize it and make it relevant to them, right? So you come to floodfactor.com, you punch in your address. I've picked one out in Norfolk because Norfolk is really suffering when it comes to flooding recently. And you can see that, if this was my address, I'm then able to really quickly see, oh, okay, I have some risk of flood going on. Why, and what do I need to be concerned about? So they start talking you through different different elements of why your property is at risk. Things like how likely it is to flood within the next 15 years, and you can update these and see, how that changes the prediction. You can also, and I think they just recently added this, and I really like it. They added this prediction of how much money and structural damage a flood could do to your property. And it looks like you can even, kind of set some of your building details to affect that that value that's displayed. So I think that's pretty cool because you can customize it. You're able to see other properties in the area. Let's say that your neighbor's house is a little further up the hill. Okay, well they're at lower risk because they're at higher elevation. You can also this is really cool. You can see different storm surges that occurred recently, and maybe you just bought the property, so you weren't there in 2011, and you don't know how it was impacted by storm surge at that time. They even have a thing here where you can see how flooding would impact your home based on the level and the sorts of damages that you could expect. They have more. I mean, they have a ton of stuff here, but I really like that it's all broken into these sections, so it's very easy to understand what's on the page. It's very easy to jump between the sections depending on what's relevant to you. And they're providing all this really great contextual information here. Also, they have little information tooltips that come up that help you understand exactly what you're looking at. It's very well explained, and all the controls are really well done. You can see how different factors can affect your property, which I think can be really impactful as you're planning for the future, right? They get into a little bit of the environmental changes that are causing some of these. They have some causing some of the flooding risks. They have these great maps down here that you can also update.
Yeah, and so it looks like the maps are not geo-specific the way the earlier ones are. They're just kind of to give you that context.
Yeah, these are national trends for context, which I think is actually really helpful, because you can see kind of how your area is being impacted as opposed to others. For example, one, I think, somewhat misconception about sea level rise is that it's uniform, whereas it's actually impacting certain areas of the globe more than others. So you can see in Louisiana, it's really increasing more than it is even in Norfolk, which is also having serious problems.
Yeah, I will say I find that one a little confusing because it's not clear to me what if the arrows are depth of rise.
How much?
Yeah, or like geography. Like, is it just going up the Mississippi River that is increasing along that tall line, or
sure. Yeah, I think that's a good point. They have this little key here, but I mean, this is one of the things we have to think through a lot is how we're representing data actually understandable, right? And I think in this case, you pointed out a really good limitation that comparing, first you have to notice this little arrow here with the annotation. You then have to compare the length of that arrow to these other arrows, right? So maybe this is probably Miami. Looks like maybe Miami's at 3 inches compared to 1980 to 2010, but I have to make that comparison in my head, and it takes a little time, and you have to actually spend some time reading the graphic and really digging into it to understand that. So maybe there's a better way to do this.
Or even just something simple like tooltips, so that as you hover over the arrows.
Right, yeah. They do have, of course, they have the limitation of not being very accessible, and folks also have to take the effort to actually hover over the thing with the tooltip to realize that it's there. But
it's never fun on mobile.
Yeah, right. And of course there's mobile.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I like the precipitation change, though. That's something I don't think we talk about enough.
Yeah, right. I think and I think it's great that they default to this, because this is probably the factor that's having a more immediate impact on your property, right? Like we've had some really crazy storms where I live recently. And so I think overall, on this website, they've made some really great decisions about what information to put in front of users first. And that's something that, we're thinking about all of the time when we talk with clients and trying to make sure that we really understand what their users need and what information we need to show on the page. A lot of times it can be really tempting, especially on data sites, to put everything on the page, right? And we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that we're showing users information that's actually relevant and useful and helps them understand.
Yeah, I really, to your point, I think, the thing that sticks out most to me is a lot of the interactives are very simple. There are things like the number that you showed earlier, where it's the cost of what water damage could do to your specific house. But they really they put a lot of effort that you can see into thinking about what matters to people and what information that is most helpful and most actionable. Earlier on the page, they were like 6 inches, and I was like, 6 inches seems like a lot. Like, I don't know what that actually would do to my house, but scroll down, you can find it.
Yes. And then I really like this. They included this solution area, and I think this is cool because all this is quite dire, and it's kind of abstract, like you just pointed out. But this is actually, okay, well, what can I actually do to help protect my property. And some of it's really sensible stuff, like, hey, you should probably clean your gutters. But then they also offer, more advanced things, more costly things that you can consider doing.
Oh God, I just saw raised electrical outlets. I hadn't even thought about that. I mean, you probably should if you are worried about being flooded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, anything else you want to say about the lessons we can learn from these three things?
That's about it. The main takeaway is always know your data set, understand what your users need to get out of it. And that's something that we here at Ally love to talk about.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Join us for more videos later.